Today, I am going to be talking about a chapter in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa, titled The Hard Way. And he begins by saying that the path that we are on is called, quote, the hard way, end quote, because it takes effort. That there's no one that's going to save you. There's no one that's going to enlighten you. That it's on your shoulders. It depends on you. It's about openness, and it's a mutual creation. It's something that you have to participate in and open up to. So he says, first of all, it's not like joining an organization and following orders that it won't give you security. He talks about it won't hold your hand. And it takes, he used the word tremendous effort to acknowledge yourself and to unmask. That we have to stand alone, naked. And he then goes on to say that it might seem contradictory to the loving kindness, peace, gentleness that are associated with Buddhism. But this is what it takes to really open up and travel the path. That he talks about it not being heroic in terms of going against our usual patterns. It doesn't mean that if, I think he used talked about that you're a hippie in blue jeans and you've got to get dressed in a three-piece suit. And if you're dressed in a three-piece suit, you have to drop out and become a hippie. It isn't like that. It is, and he talks about other ways, like becoming a vegetarian, giving away your possessions. He talks about this being false heroism, that it's all external. And there's not much going on internally. And he discusses various spiritual paths that are available around the world. And this was a talk given 50 years ago, and there's even more available now, especially due to the internet. And new paths are developed all the time. The human mind is very inventive and creative. So if you choose the Tibetan tradition, it isn't about taking on Tibetan clothing, Tibetan customs, even about flying to India. That in all of these different situations, whether it be Buddhism, Native American, Hinduism, and New Age, and on and on and on, that it's easy to feel blissful in these situations because they're new, kind of like a honeymoon. They're exotic. You feel like you have been separated from your ordinary miserable world, but it doesn't last long. That's the problem. And in fact, a lot of people go from one tradition, and then when the bliss is gone, go to another tradition. And when the newness or bliss is gone, go to another one, and so on and so forth. So the bottom line is that your mind does not get tamed by just trying something different. Now, this doesn't mean that these practices and the other traditions are wrong. The problem is that we have this notion that there must be some kind of magic potion to help us attain the right state of mind. Back then, it was also common to think it was you just took the right drugs that you would attain the right state of mind. So again, in a way, he's this kind of repetitive, chapter after chapter after chapter, but he says we can't, if we expect manipulating the physical world leads to wisdom and understanding, this is a huge problem. It won't work. We can't escape who we are. He talks about the idea of a gift, a real gift, which is sacrificing something important and giving up hope of anything for return. And so our relationship with the guru is this way. We really want to receive you might say, a real gift from him. We want to open up. You might say we are giving up our ego as a gift to the guru. We're sacrificing something very important to us. He goes on and says the fundamental question is, quote, have we ever unmasked, stepping out of our suit of armor and our shirt and our skin and our flesh and our veins, right down to the heart? So this process is a real learning process. It's about dismantling, giving up, undoing, opening up. And it's threatening. And that's why it's the hard way. And he kind of touches on something he talked about in the last chapter, and that is that now you've made a commitment to a spiritual path. It's painful. You keep taking the old stuff off until you're exposed to the universe. But now you can't go back. That he uses the words of terrible and excruciating. And he says, many who are seeking an easy path should not have begun. So he then uses the doctor analogy, where the doctor is going to operate on you, but he's not going to use an anesthesia. That he wants to communicate with our disease. He won't let us hide behind a facade of, quote, spirituality, psychological sophistication, false psychological illness, or any other disguise. And we can hide behind any of those. I've heard people say, well, I'm bipolar or I'm ADHD or whatever. And then you define yourself by that and it becomes very solid. And so any of these are disguises, masks, things that we use to hide behind our knowledge and so forth. a quote from Suzuki Roshi, who Chogyam Trungpa admired greatly, is that an expert's mind has few possibilities. A beginner's mind has many possibilities. And it's talking about the same thing, that we really want to have in this unmasking process a beginner's mind, where there's a lot of space, a lot of openness, a lot of possibilities. So as I said earlier, he says it's too late to start all over again, to leave and start all over again, that you've already gone too far, that it would be, in his words, too painful to go through it all again. That we have to go all the way. Quote, we must be willing to communicate in a completely open and direct way with our spiritual friend and with our life, without hidden corners. So going back to the doctor analogy, that the doctor has to know us, he has to know our disease, he has to know how to work with the disease skillfully. But if we are not open, he's really not going to know what the disease is. And he can't work properly with his student. So he finishes up the chapter by saying, unmask unrealistic expectations for the spiritual friend. And these unrealistic expectations are that he or she has extraordinary power to give us special spiritual experiences. This chapter is relatively short, and there's a long section on question and answers. And this is typical of a lot of teachings that Chogyam Trungpa gave, where there was as much or more teaching in the question and answer sessions as there was in the talk, that the talk in a way introduced the question and answers. Well, the first question is, does opening just happen, or is there a method? And he responds by saying it's an automatic process. It's a matter of accepting what is. And when you do that, it becomes obvious. It's not about learning a method. The second question is, do we need a spiritual friend? And his answer is, you need someone to watch you. It will make it feel more real, having the teacher watching you. He uses the example of the difference between undressing at home alone and in a public place. You need to have that feeling of the guru knows whether I'm unmasking or not. The next question is, so it is really exposing ourselves to ourselves? And he replies that yes, but we have such a strong awareness of ourselves that we need a strong awareness of an audience. Going back to the previous question and answer, that we need to have this awareness, a very strong awareness of an audience, of being seen. The next question is, why aren't developing discipline and mastering austerities the hard way. And he says, you have this idea of heroism, false heroism, of being heroic, and it's more ego, that it's not opening up. It's the easy way. Now, many of you have participated in Young here. This is a more advanced practice than Young. He's talking here to relatively new students. And so the Young is fine. He's not condemning the practices like the Young, which are fasting and so forth. But if we are doing it with this false idea of heroism, that because I'm enduring so much hardship, yada, 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 then everything's going to be okay. For those of you who have done multiple Young here, you have probably experienced opening up yourself and finding all kinds of things about yourself. It's not the same as opening up in front of the guru, but you are learning more about yourself, getting more acquainted with yourself. The next question is it necessary to do the heroic way first? And he says, no, that you're just adding more layers this way. And then you have more layers to remove. Can understanding the unmasking process eliminate the pain of unmasking? The difference between intellectual understanding and experience is huge here. He says understanding torture and experiencing it are two very different things, that you have to experience it yourself, that it's not an intellectual process that you understand, that you don't need to look for or create painful situations. In our lives, it's always there. You can't avoid it. The next question is, explain, quote, it's a terrifying situation and you want to run. So he answers, you have to be willing to do it. Very simply, you have to be willing to do it. To not run. Next one, explain. The student is explaining his own experience. I'm with my guru for 5 minutes. The roof falls in. I'm left to deal with it. With a big question mark, like what is going on? So he answers by saying, this is a question of how much a person has been with himself. Does he know himself? And again, this goes back to unmasking, and the guru is helping you open up. But again, you have to do it yourself. Trungpa Rinpoche, needless to say, was quite direct with his students. And that probably isn't much of an exaggeration, saying that I've been with the guru for 5 minutes and the roof falls in. That he very easily could, let's just say, act in a bizarre way when with a student. And of course, all of it is to wake the student up, to make them unmask, or to help them unmask, I should say. I know one of things that he was famous for was scheduling a talk and then showing up 2 hours later, making everybody sit there and sit and sit and sit and deal with whatever comes up in their minds about any discomfort they're having, any anger they might be having against him showing up so late, making them wait and wait and wait, and so on and so forth. He was very good at bringing up a person's neurosis. So why does someone get on the path? And he says, well, if you expose yourself, you're already on the path. If you expose yourself partly, you're partly on the path. The more you tell the doctor, the sooner he will be able to cure you. Going back to that doctor analogy at the end of the chapter. So then, should I expose myself to evil knowing I might get hurt? And he responds by saying, opening up isn't martyring yourself. That is this false heroism, the false hard way. Feeling you might get hurt means the self-preservation of ego. And so we have to cut through that self-preservation of ego, the desire to preserve our own existence. Now, this is very difficult, needless to say. He's talking about where the path is headed. But if you can drop that urge to preserve ego, then you can see and deal with the situation clearly as it is. You see it not from a viewpoint, but from more of an aerial perspective. The next question is, achieving complete openness is a difficult thing. It's more of a statement. And a response is that a struggle is irrelevant to opening. That, quote, if you give up the struggle itself, that takes care of the whole problem. That actually the struggle is ego. And that this is what we are trying to let go of, is ego. So if we give up the struggle, there is no one there to conquer the struggle, to be victorious. In a way, you could say that all of this is just letting yourself be. Just let yourself be, open up. So the next question is, should you express anger in order to open? And he says, of course, that is an incorrect view, that expressing anger feeds ego. He says that the proper way to expose yourself to anger is to see its, quote, real living quality, end quote. Seeing the situation as it is, instead of trying to do something with it, manipulate the situation in some way or another. So he goes on and says that this applies to exposing yourself in general. That if you totally open up without preconceptions, you would know what to do. there would be a lot of space, a lot of possibilities. And he finishes up by saying, in that case, you would choose the creative way. And I'm going to emphasize creative, which means you're not following habitual patterns. You are not just doing things the way you usually do them. You're not doing things purposely the way you don't usually do them. That you've got a lot of space. You're seeing this aerial view of what is, and you realize that there are lots of possibilities in the situation. It's true spontaneity in a way. The next question is collecting things an inescapable stage? And very simply, he says, if you collect things, then there is the pain when you have to give them up. And you can collect a lot of things. I just read in online on the newspaper that an animal shelter, I'm not sure where it was, they brought in hundreds and hundreds of parakeets that somebody was collecting, but of course was not taken care of. And the birds were close to death. And I don't know, I think it may have been as many as 600 parakeets. And the animal shelter where they were taken to was both overwhelmed by the vast number of them, but also pleased to have them where they could be taken care of properly and not mistreated so much. Can you begin to see what is who you are without a teacher? And his answer is no, that you have to surrender and open up to a spiritual friend before you can do it to yourself. And then this must be a follow-up question. Does a spiritual friend need to be living? And the answer is any other being would be imaginary. So you need to have a living spiritual friend or lama or guru. Another question in that direction is, would the teachings of Christ be a spiritual friend? And his answer is that any written teaching is open to interpretation by ego. And this is why we can't rely on books alone. That the Kagyu lineage is called the practice lineage. And that gives you an idea that books are very important, but they're open to interpretation. And it is through our relationship with our spiritual friend that we avoid getting sucked up by, you might say, ego games. The last question is about psychotherapy. And he talks about it two ways. One, it can be like a hobby, that it's the therapeutic thing to do, that when you focus on the past, you're defining yourself by your past, and you can't change the past. So it can be, in his words, destructive when it gets in the way of working with what's happening now. It's also unhealthy to see a therapist as a guru or your spiritual friend as a savior. So now the helpful way is that when it emphasizes living in the present, working with present problems, experiencing our emotions and our feelings, when it avoids complicating things with theories. And he says, when we try to unravel the past, there is a struggle and an ambition. And the final quote that I'm going to end with is, the idea is not to regard the spiritual path as something very luxurious and pleasurable, but to see it as just facing the facts of life. The question is that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche talks about vegetarianism being this false kind of heroism, and yet the Gyalwang Karmapa has encouraged all his students to be vegetarian, or at least eat less meat, and his monasteries, nunneries, and centers to be vegetarian. So it's a matter of motivation and how you are viewing things. Actually, in Vajrayana Buddhism, motivation is the most important thing. So if you are taking on a vegetarian diet with the idea that it's going to make you a better person, that's false heroism. I'm doing this, it's tough, I'd rather have a cheeseburger, but I'm going to be a better person if I have a veggie burger instead. Whereas what the Karmapa is talking about is that a lot of beings, a lot of domestic animals suffer greatly, and then they're killed. And that we are eating their flesh, and it's causing tremendous suffering. Plus, it is causing environmental damage and global warming. So the point here is that we're doing this to benefit others, being a vegetarian, not for our own personal benefit. Question is about examining yourself and your motivation and your ego, and where is the line when you are making this aspiration at the beginning of a practice that I'm doing this to benefit beings, and so on and so forth. The point is to just not get conceptual about it, just make it, and then do the practice and try to do as little evaluation as possible, because when you're evaluating, he talks earlier about the watcher, that you're really watching yourself, and it's just strengthening ego rather than weakening ego. That he and other places would make the distinction between being and doing. Ego is a doer, and we want to be a being, just letting ourselves be and open up. That isn't about doing things. But motivation is important. But again, not because, well, this is going to make me a better person if I have this motivation. It's just like acknowledging it and then dropping it. And then not, you might say, playing with it and playing with it and playing with it and playing with it.